Hello, Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt, and today we're going to be talking about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Lost Omens Travel Guide. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. So the latest book in the Lost Omens series by Paizo weighs in at 127 pages. Right at the start, we're going to talk about the stuff you're not going to find in this book, just to get that out of the way. You're not going to find a bunch of ancestries and a whole lot of mechanical stuff. This is very much a setting first, lore first, sort of GM aid. And full disclosure at the top as well, I don't play typically in Golarion. I do have an Abomination Vaults game going, and I've run some one-shots here and there and little standalone adventures. But I generally play in my own homebrew world. And so you would think, for a person like me, this would not be a very useful book, because it goes into a whole bunch of stuff that is ostensibly specific to the Golarion setting. That's not the case. And as we go through here, I'll be sure to point out to you how I use this book, or, intend to use this book, because I haven't had it a super long time. Actually, that's not true. I've had it for a little while. We're getting this out a little bit late. We do apologize for that. Life gets in the way a little bit, but I really like this book, and I'm going to tell you all the reasons that you should like it, even if you don't play in Golarion. And if you do play in Golarion, of course, you should like it even more. So as hinted, this is the lightest mechanical book we've had so far for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's very light on mechanics. There's not no mechanics. We'll get into the little bit that there are here and there, but for the most part, this is a book that's going to tell you about different places, cultures, and people that live in Golarion. And one of the really cool things that it does is it gives you things that are going to be not necessarily things that would be relevant to a campaign or an adventure. It's much more about giving you context for the adventures that you're playing. We get a small smattering of items. Mostly these are going to be alchemical items and a few trade goods and things like that we haven't really had an in-depth dive into. And if you're the type of person that gets excited about trade goods, it's a good book for you. But we also get some new sort of concepts. We get events, which are sort of like these rituals that you don't get to pick the start time because they are based on world events, whether it is animal migrations and crop harvests to blood rains in Ustalav and volcanic eruptions. So it's a lot of stuff that is beyond your control to begin, but it allows your players, it gives your players some things that they can do during these events, and it's great for inspiration for creating your own events as well, and the way that they can tap into the natural or sometimes unnatural energies that come with these sort of events. In the section called Stars, we get all sorts of information about the most common constellations and provide several rare backgrounds related to them, including being granted magic for being born under a certain sign, very much like zodiac sort of astrology type of stuff that is going to be very interesting for a lot of folks, especially with the announcement of a sort of Harrow-themed adventure path coming up. I think that there's going to be a nice little tie-in there, and you can really make some very esoteric, classic spiritualism style characters with these and that, and the stuff that came with the Dark Archive. And that's really the extent of the crunch that we have. But we do have a lot more useful stuff beyond that. We have some prices for strange animals, like a rare lizard that can swallow your valuables for safekeeping, to be safely regurgitated later. As long as no one thinks to check your lizard, you can smuggle that, what scroll or whatever it is into the party, as long as they allow lizards. There's also rules for several games, board games, and a spectator sport as well called Basilisk, that is something sort of like Quidditch meets lacrosse. And it's very cool to have all the rules for these sort of things that you can introduce to your players when they come to a new town that's, super into Basilisk or, whatever appropriate name you might decide to call it. Or, be going into a tavern instead of just having, all these farmers over here are drinking and the bartenders, taking orders. Now you can also have a table that is playing these games and have all the rules for those games already set up and everything. And they're mostly games that are either hinted at as being sort of knockoffs of games that we already have, or they're games that are thoroughly explained so that you can play them at your own table. And that's really cool, and it's very cool as well that they're just sort of giving nods, like, yes, there is a version of Risk in this world. If you want to play Risk, people play Risk, which makes sense, big mobile combats with wars and armies and stuff like that seems like a sort of thing that some types of people who engage in that in the real world might want to have in their downtime between wars to keep brushed up on. We also get a whole lot more like slice of life stuff. We get rules for housing costs, whether you're renting or buying. We get some examples of typical buildings like homes, criminal dens, and city watch buildings. And we get a few homes, depending on where your players are. So you can have some examples of the different sort of concepts and things that may exist in certain regions. There's also a whole lot of notes on different architecture, so you can describe buildings differently based on the region, and they do a good job of explaining sort of sometimes how these sweeping, the different motifs and things like that come into the different buildings and why they are designed the way that they are. And that's very cool, especially if you're just trying to hammer home to your players that they're in a very different sort of country or entering a different cultural region or something like that. Describing the different types of buildings and stuff that are not typical to what they've seen is a great way to sort of start setting that tone early. Along that route, we get pages of fashion, and not just like your typical stuff. We get a couple of options for several different scenarios, adventurers, nobility, parties, and stuff like that. There's sections on like Halloween costumes as well. We'll give that this a little bit. But there's a lot of rules here for you to be able to describe the setting more ably than you could without this book. And, you could make this stuff up on your own, certainly, but you're probably not going to have as varied and broad an input as an entire team who worked on this book did. And you're going to risk getting stale. And besides, just having these pictures where you can show up and show an orc in fancy dress, that's pretty good. One of the best sections of this book is called What People Know, and that tells you what the average person in the world of Golarion might know about the major events in the world that have occurred. Many of them directly related to past adventure paths and things that you may have played if you play, pre-published adventures a lot. But we also, just have sort of this smattering of like just this vagueness. And you can take that, like when I say this vagueness, I mean, how for the average citizen, it doesn't matter what Tar-Baphon is doing unless they live very close to Tar-Baphon. And, so they'll have these sort of vague ideas of these problems far away and how that sort of rectifies and how they look at adventurers and things like that. And it's things that you may not always think about when you're running a game and the players are encountering all these NPCs in a town, especially remote towns where a group of adventurers coming through might seem like a big crazy event. Just giving you some ideas on how the NPCs are going to be viewing the players, because we always so often are just thinking about how the players are going to react to the NPCs, and maybe not always vice versa. And that's really cool and really important, I think, to make a town feel real, as if, they arrive and they don't get the kind of welcome they were expecting because of all these very real reasons that have nothing to do with them or even what's going on in the campaign. We have nice sections on crime and punishment in the world of Golarion. One of my favorite things is that, if you are fined for a crime, it's based on how much money you're worth, not a flat amount of money, so that the really rich in a lot of places, if they're committing crimes, they're not just going to have, pocket change as their fine. They're going to have a fine that is as meaningful to them as a much smaller fine would be to, the working class citizen and stuff like that. And that's really cool, and it's just an example of how Paizo has designed Golarion to be this very progressive, much more progressive than our world in so many ways, so many important and good ways. It's this aspirational fantasy that they aim for with Golarion, and especially in second edition, that is just really nice. Especially when you're trying not to deal with some of the ugly parts of the real world, and then you're playing in this world that, it's still got problems that we don't have, dragons and undead kings and stuff like that. But it's nice to see some of the more pervasive everyday problems that people deal with handled a little bit better than in the real world. And it's just, like I said, aspirational fantasy settings are, generally speaking, unless I'm trying to tell a very specific type of story, I find that they are a lot more fun of a place to be in whenever you can. And so having little notes like that in here they just warm my heart a little bit. Hopefully you'll agree. One of my favorite things, though, about that section on the crimes and their punishment are the wanted posters that we have. Sometimes they're wanted posters that criminal elements have put up, against do-gooders or even, legitimate law enforcement people who have put them away for their crimes and they want revenge. But also there's some really weird stuff involving alligators and blood elemental. Definitely worth checking out. Great for a laugh and just great for an idea. I mean, I saw those wanted posters and I want to put every one of those NPCs in my game. So, as usual, Paizo is, in presentation and art, killing it in this book. We also get a lot of information on religious iconography, the types of symbols and stuff that you might see in a town or, on a place of business if they follow certain deities or pantheons. We get weather maps for Golarion to see, what sort of weather, especially, bad weather you can expect to see in certain places, as well as monster sightings and folklore, which we'll touch on in a moment. But I really, like this idea of, it's almost like when you look at like an old map and they've got, the monster over here and stuff like that. And it's very much that same feel of like you're looking at this map and seeing like where all the dangerous monster sightings are. And I really like that. And that's great just to show to your players and say, hey, where do you want to go? And they're like, well, I want to go see what that thing is. So I really like that. And that's given me, I don't know why I've never put like just the monsters as part of like a world map for a home game. So I'm probably going to do that. My personal favorite section is the Folklore and Mythology section, which covers creation myths and fables and ghost stories and fairy tales, which are something that interest me in the real world and are always fun. It's one of the reasons I like the Dark Archive so much is with the cryptids and things is because in a fantasy setting, what do the myths look like? When dragons are real, when you can hardly hop on a boat without getting attacked by harpies and sea serpents, like what are the stories that parents whisper to their kids to get them to behave? What are the things like that? Like what inspires somebody to go out and adventure when divine emissaries of gods might come through down the street any day of the week? Like, who are your heroes in that situation? And so it's really cool to see that kind of stuff. One of my favorite little bits is a section on superstition. And it has just a whole little series. One of them is goblins and how they think that rules don't apply to them. I'm just going to read that section to you because it's fun. If they don't like a rule, many goblins believe they only have to say it aloud 3 times for it to no longer apply to them anymore. This, of course, has led many a goblin into trouble. And that's, if you don't love Pathfinder goblins and their weird chaos brains that love pickles, then I don't know how to help you. You should get on that. You should learn to love them. That's a very goblin, specifically Pathfinder, especially goblin sort of attitude. And I love it. Sort of going on from there, there are sections that are devoted to festivals and holidays and other types of celebration, as well as a day in the life of the average citizen. One thing that's really cool about the celebrations is, and I sort of mentioned that we have some Halloween costumes. We have an entire section on this sort of Lamashtu themed festival that is Halloween functionally, and it goes through all the weird sort of Golarion versions of the traditions that will look a little familiar to people in America who celebrate Halloween. But yeah, it's all a little twisted and a little bit different and very interesting. And there's a great, like, where's Waldo sort of image with it. And so I had a lot of fun with that, and I'm sure you will too. And just, it's something that I don't have a lot of like holidays and festivals. And I've definitely been inspired to, which always happens when you're going through a Lost Omens book. You're going to have some ideas, things to drop into your campaign, even if you don't play in Golarion. Like I said, I mean, I can definitely have a reason for a festival or a spooky sort of Halloween themed thing, even outside of Golarion. And now I'm going to. In addition to the average day with the citizens, we get, we touched before a little bit on not just trade goods, but the trade routes and everything and how that works, which is something that, as somebody who has not studied history and trade and things like that extensively, it's very nice for me to have just these sort of guides and little tips on how it's handled in Golarion and what sort of predicts what types of goods and stuff will be needed elsewhere. It's not super in-depth, it's not a textbook on that, but it is nice to just have a quick little reference of some materials and the types of places that would have them and would need them for trade. And speaking of practical things, we also have a section on food and drink, which includes not only some lore and information, but also some actual recipes that you can make yourself. There are 2 food items and I think 3 or 4 cocktails that you can make up. If you like to share adult beverages when you're having your adult orcs and wizards game, then these would be wonderful to serve. If you can't tell, this is a really fun book, and you can tell how much the developers, the writers, and everybody, how much fun they had designing and creating and filling it out. There's a lot of really inspired stuff in here, and I would say if you're playing in Golarion, this is almost required. Especially if you're doing a homebrew in Golarion, most adventure paths are going to give you the information you need for the region with the gazetteers and gazetteers? I have no idea how to say that now that I think about it. I've never said it aloud. But you get enough information for the APs, but if you're trying to homebrew and run your own adventures in Golarion, I'd say this is a must-have book. And if you're like me and you don't really play in Golarion and don't intend to need to know the specifics of it, it's still a really good guidebook and will give you inspiration on creating different towns and regions and inspiring you on how your NPCs are going to react to your PCs and all sorts of other stuff like that. It's a really fun book. I really like it. Don't be turned off by the lack of mechanics, because mechanics are only part of the battle when you're planning out a campaign and an adventure. And making it feel real and feel lived in is so important if you want your players invested, and I think we all typically do. And so for that reason, homebrew GM, Golarion, whatever, I recommend this book. It's going to have you thinking about parts of your world that you never would have thought about before. And even if you don't necessarily apply any of that directly or immediately, just having that information kicking around in your brain, having these sort of conversations with yourself, or, if you have like a GM cabal where you all talk and get inspiration from, like I do, then you'll have that similar thing. And, you really just cannot beat things that are going to inspire you to think about more corners of your campaign, because then, as soon as you don't have a plan for something or don't have any idea, your players are going to ask, and then you're going to have to fill that in suddenly and make it look like you knew it all along. So having this information is going to help you there. But if you've checked it out, if you've read through it, let us know down in the comments. What are your favorite parts? Would you want to see more books like this? I'm sure Paizo would like to know. It really, when you think about just how their sort of business is organized, and you think about how, you have these different types of writers and stuff, being able to devote a book to just to minimal mechanics has got to, help them free them up to put more mechanics or focus on big mechanical problems or, ideas that they're having elsewhere. So it's really nice to see them branching out and having these books that are, not necessarily half and half, but, something a little bit more one way or the other. Sometimes we get mechanics heavy, like the Ancestry Guide and Knights of Lastwall, I think was pretty mechanics heavy, all things considered. And Mwangi Expanse a little bit, about half. But it's nice to be able to have like these counterpoints, some really mechanics heavy books and then some really mechanics light books, plus of course the ones in between. So I hope you like the book. I certainly do. I believe the next publication for Paizo that's coming is Impossible Lands, which is another Lost Omens book that is going to hit on a region neighboring the Mwangi Expanse that we got, I believe, was that last year, 2 years ago? It's been a while. But that's it. Thanks so much for watching. We really hope you enjoyed it. Welcome to the Collective, and we'll see you next time.